Welcome to the Answers Yes podcast, where we interview some of the most interesting people that have said yes to opportunities in their life. We hope that through these stories, you can learn to create your own destiny by saying yes along the way. Join us as we explore the new series covering topics such as passion, integrity, and hard work. I'm your host, Jim Riley, and I hope you enjoy these interviews as much as I do. I believe that everyone has an important message worth hearing. Hello and welcome to the Answers Yes podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. I love all the feedback immediately been getting this new year and the shows that we pushed out over the holidays means a lot to me, and it does give us some direction, at least the fact that we're going in the right way for our listeners. And if you love the show, please share it. We appreciate it. That's the only way people are going to find out about us. And we're on all the major podcast platforms. So thank you for that. Today, I've got John Livesay on the line. John, how you doing?
Great, Jim. Wonderful to be with you.
As we do with all of our guests, we catch up for that brief minute before we hit the record button. And you mentioned, hey, a lot of people are taking the day off because it's still the holiday. And most entrepreneurs probably are not. We're probably out there grinding. And I love that mentality. We might as well utilize every minute we have.
If you're passionate about what you're doing, it doesn't feel like work all the time, and your creative mind is going and your juices are going. And in this particular case, I feel the message I have about the power of storytelling can help a lot of people. And so I'm always passionate about doing that whenever I have the opportunity.
You've got your book in the background photo there. The sail is in the tail. And I want to talk about that. But can you give us some background on you first so we know who we're listening to and what your story is?
Who the heck is this guy? I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago and ended up going to school at the University of Illinois and majoring in advertising. I thought that was a great combination of show business and business, and breaking through the clutter and commercials that tell stories and tug at our hearts that make us remember them and have an emotional connection really intrigued me. And then I got into the world of selling and realized that whoever told the best story is the one that got the sale.
Mm-hmm.
I had a career at Condé Nast for a number of years, selling advertising to brands like Lexus and Gap jeans. And they would say, we looked at 15 different titles and brands, and we've narrowed it down to 5. We're going to pick 3. And the 5 of you get to come in for 30 minutes back to back and tell us why we should pick you. Don't talk about numbers. And half of the reps, Jim, were a deer in headlights. What?
Mm-hmm.
I can't talk about circulation and my reader's income. What am I going to talk about? And that's when I realized it was whoever told the best story about the marketing idea, or a story about why this particular vision that the editor has attracts the mindset of a reader that would be most likely to want to buy this new car. So that's really where I got into realizing the power of storytelling and became a sales keynote speaker. From there, I first spoke to the advertiser sales teams, whether it was a car company or a fashion company. And then the last several years have been out on my own, getting hired by tech companies and healthcare companies who realized that the old way of selling, of just pushing out facts and figures, doesn't move the needle. And I don't know if it ever did, but maybe in a day when you didn't have access to all the information yourself, you needed a rep to tell you the facts, but you don't need that anymore. And if you don't tell stories, you're basically drowning in a sea of sameness.
I appreciate that approach. It's funny, when we go to church on Sundays, the pastor always tells a compelling story. And I realized without that story, the message just seems to be dull. So similar to the one I've heard my whole entire life on Sundays, but yet his storytelling ability has changed our lives and our interest in attending church.
Good.
And, look, he's there to sell a different product, but you're so right. The importance of that story. And, I'm curious, how do we teach people to tell stories in their sales pitch?
Well, I have a little 3C checklist that makes it really easy to start. It needs to be clear, concise, and compelling. So when you've got a story that you think is good, test it out with your friends and family and say, was that clear or did I confuse you? Because the confused mind's going to say no, but not tell you they're confused. Is it concise? And here, Jim, is the real reason storytelling is so powerful. If you can tell a story that's concise enough that people can remember and repeat it to other people, they become your brand ambassadors. Because in the world of sales today, it's usually a lot of people involved in the decision, and you need somebody who's heard your presentation to remember and repeat that story for you. And if it's too long, they can't remember it. And finally, is it compelling? Does it have an emotional hook? Without the stakes being high, we don't really care about the story. So we have to have some drama in the story for us to feel anything. And that's ultimately, we buy emotionally and then back it up with logic. So that's the first step is, let's just make sure my stories are clear, concise, and compelling. And then we can work on the structure of it after that.
Isn't it amazing that that structure we learned in high school, we never thought it'd be relevant enough when we became
Unlike
adults.
geometry, you can actually use this. Yes.
In my young entrepreneur syndicate classes, we teach the importance of a story for a variety of reasons. And with your 3 C's, it's really important that people pay attention to that, because a buyer wants to be brought into the story itself. Yes. And by the way, kudos for you for working at Condé Nast. I was on the other side of that fence. I was the vice president of marketing for Kettle One Vodka.
Oh, what a great brand. Yeah.
Wonderful brand. And we didn't start marketing in print ads until we sold 1 million cases nationally, which eventually we did. And we started print ads. But, I met with so many companies like Condé Nast and had those pitches. And you're so right. The stories are the compelling reason why we wanted to work with that publication. Really did make a difference. Give us some examples of some pitches that you've done, or maybe some top line stories, and give us that idea.
Olympus Medical brought me in to be their speaker at their sales meeting. And they said, we realize that everything coming out of our marketing materials and our salespeople is the what and the how, and not the why. We need to tell stories of why we're doing this, much like the Simon Sinek TED Talk. And they weren't able to afford Simon, and I'm happy to be the second choice in those scenarios.
Right.
So I said, well, what do we have this product. It makes the surgeries go 30% faster. It's so logical. We don't understand why more doctors aren't buying this. And I realized, there's no story here. And you're pushing numbers and logic. Even in this situation, it's an emotional decision. So now I taught them how to tell this case story instead of a case study. And it sounds like this. Imagine how happy Dr. Higgins was 6 months ago using our equipment, that he could go out to the patient's family in the waiting room an hour earlier than expected. And if you've ever waited for someone you love to come out of surgery, every minute feels like an hour. The doctor comes out, tells the family good news. The scope shows they don't have cancer, puts them out of their waiting misery, and then turns to me and says, the rep, this is why I became a doctor, from moments like this. Now that rep tells that clear, concise, and compelling short case story to another doctor who sees themselves in the story and says, you know what? That's why I became a doctor. I want your equipment too. So Olympus Medical said, oh my gosh, it gives us chills. Not only are we not telling stories like that, but it never occurred to us to make a patient's family a character in the story as opposed to the doctor or the hospital. So if you look at that, why does that story work? It's got the 4 parts. The first part is the exposition. You got to paint the picture. We know the doctor's name, the location. We're in the story. The doctor, by the way, is the hero of the story, not the rep or the equipment. The problem, the stakes are very high. And in this case, who really is affected besides the financial outcome of a surgery ending an hour earlier? It's the patient's family. And you'll see how I pulled you into that story by saying, if you've ever waited. And even if you haven't, you probably imagine how it would feel, or someone who had to do that. Then the solution is the scope shows there's no cancer. But that's not where the story ends. It's got the resolution. That's the magic of a good story. What is life like after, where the doctor remembers his why? And imagine if the Wizard of Oz ended when Dorothy got in the balloon to go back to Kansas. But no, there's that wonderful resolution scene where she's in bed going, there's no place like home. And I appreciate everybody and everything so much. That's why that's a classic story. So if you use that structure in your case stories, you're going to really have that emotional hook and be memorable and magnetic. And as you said, pull people in.
John, what do we say to the people that are convinced in their minds that they don't have a story, that they
Mm,
can't find that story, right?
yes.
Because you know they're out there.
Oh, I do. Well, I tell everybody, well, here's the good news. You don't have to be this gifted athlete or gifted performer on Broadway to learn how to be a good storyteller, and that everyone has a story.
Mm-hmm.
And we first start by thinking of your own story of origin. If I was working with you on your story of origin, like how did you get into marketing? How did you pick Kettle One? All those little details would start to paint a picture like a journalist. Who, what, where, when, where'd you first get exposed to marketing? Why did you like it? What was it about the Kettle One brand that that distinguished it from all the other vodkas out there? Because really, when you talk about a commodity, I know there's some subtle changes in potato and this and that, but for the most part, it's a clear liquid, beautiful package,
Right.
and you have it. Tying it into art, if I remember correctly, that Kettle One did. So there's a story there that maybe you have a background in art. Sometimes you can have a story that happens to you, and so you start looking for things in your everyday life to find your own story. For example, when I was coming back from a sales keynote that I gave to an architecture firm from Columbus, Ohio, I live in Austin, and there was a snowstorm coming. They're like, you got to get out of here. You'll be stuck here forever. We can only get you to Atlanta. So then I had to, spend the night at the Atlanta airport, and the taxi cab got a flat tire on the way to the hotel. And you're just like, oh, this day is endless, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they go, and the next flight out of Atlanta the next day is a middle seat in the back. I'll take it, I said, and I ended up sitting next to a blind man. And I've never met a blind man traveling alone before. And I had the
Mm-hmm.
most interesting conversation with him about resilience and independence. And I said, what happens when we land? He goes, well, they usually want to put me in a wheelchair, which I hate because I can walk. And I said, I'll walk you to the baggage claim. And he said, great. You said you like to sing. Would you mind singing show tunes over your shoulder? And I'll follow you with my stick hitting your carry-on bag. So we were quite the scene in the airport. No business like show business. And, the blind man, and I thought, God, being blind in a huge airport, how overwhelming that must be. And then getting him on the escalator and getting him down to baggage claim. And I'm like, now how do I know which is your bag? And he goes, oh, I have a picture on my phone. Well, Jim, I don't know about you, but I can never find a picture fast. But he knew exactly where his
Yeah.
luggage picture was. I found the luggage and sat him down, and his sister was coming to get him. And I thought, none of that would have happened if my flight hadn't been canceled and delayed. And so all of that turned into a story of just be in the moment, be open to what is coming, and don't stay stuck in a cranky mood when, I can see,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
the basics like that. So look for little individual experiences like that in your life. I mean, that's not life-changing for either one of us, but it's a memorable story for me. I got to be of service in an unexpected way.
Yeah. And you're probably thinking, and I was upset about a flat tire, and here this guy is. He's blind
Yeah,
in the last row of the airplane, not wanting to
exactly.
be in a wheelchair. How good do we have it?
Exactly. Right. So
Yeah.
I think for people who say, I don't really have a story, I'm like, really? You've never had a canceled flight? You've never had a bad holiday experience with a crazy uncle or aunt? I can help you find a story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think our abilities to find those stories, and we probably have a story every single day that we can tell. It was just a judge in a competition where students were supposed to give a 1 minute impromptu speech on a topic, which is very hard to do, especially for a young adult student. But what I taught each one of them, because oftentimes they'd say, well, I don't know, or it would be a 10-second speech instead of a 60-second speech. I said, just tell a story, any
Yes.
story, right? It would have to be a true story. Just give me a story,
Yeah.
fill your time, and be animated about it. And it really brings this thing to life. And I would imagine in your teaching about, making a sale, if you can bring that item to life, it's going to make a difference.
Yes. Especially the part where somebody sees themselves in the story. And so
Mm-hmm.
you want to think of your brain as a jukebox, or depending on your age, a playlist. If you don't know what a jukebox is, instead of different songs, it's different stories. So you want to have multiple stories that fit your different types of buyers, avatars, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So you're not telling the same story over and over again, but you have like maybe 3 to 5 stories ready to go, depending on who you're talking to, that most likely will see themselves in that story.
I'm going to repeat that real quick because I think that's a critical learning. If you don't hear anything else in this show, write down some of your stories. Have your your go-to bag of
Yep.
stories. I've got my book in the background, and when I was working with the writer, he said, "Jim, we got to work on, let's call it 16 stories, and we'll build the lessons around those stories, right?"
Hmm.
And I thought, wow, do I even have 16 stories? Well, matter of fact, I've got 32. No, I've got 64. 120. I mean, there are so many stories that we have out there,
Yeah,
right? I mean, give
exactly.
yourself an opportunity. So your point, John, is so critical. Like I said, if you don't hear anything else in this show, just remember that, because that'll be a great tool for your bag.
And one of my clients took all of their reps' case stories and put it on a repository map
Hmm.
so that they could click. And let's say somebody has a story of a particular kind of buyer that you haven't experienced yet. Well, you can tell that other rep's story, but because you read about it in this repository. So companies with employees of 10 or more, this company has 200 salespeople, so there's 200 stories available for them to pull out at the moment's notice. And it also becomes a great onboarding tool for new hires until they make
Mm-hmm.
their first sale to use other colleagues' stories.
And then you just transitioned out of just making a sale, but helping new employees feel probably a little bit more comfortable or more
Exactly.
attached to that company. What other uses outside of those two would be good to bring a story into?
Well, as I mentioned, I work with people on their company, their personal story of origin. So
Mm-hmm.
one rep said, my mom was a nurse. That's what got me into healthcare sales. Someone else said, I was a microbiologist. I didn't want to spend my life behind a microscope. And they go, we worked with you for 2 years, Melissa. We never knew that about you.
Mm.
And no one ever asked. So having not only their case stories, but their story of origins in a repository map that connects with their case stories makes the team feel seen and heard and appreciated. And as
Mm.
we know, it's very challenging to get and keep top talent. And if you can, as a manager, make those people feel seen and heard as people and not just sales revenue producers, you're much more likely to have that bond. So it's an onboarding tool. It makes current team stay more engaged. And finally, the company story is really crucial.
Yeah.
Even if you're a one person company, you have the name of your company, you have some values, you have some things you stand for. And that's what you want to tell, that story, not how many offices you have or how long you've been in business, but a story of origin about the company. I remember when Coca-Cola had me speak at their CMO summit, I met the chief marketing officer of Auntie Anne's Pretzels.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you're in malls and and airports. How'd this all start? Oh, she sold pretzels at one farmer's market. I'm like, wow, that's a rags to riches storytelling genre, the
Mm-hmm.
American
Yeah.
dream. And so now everyone who works there feels a little connected to the brand a little bit, like, oh, this isn't someone who just had it gifted to her. She started this and look what she's accomplished. And I want to be part of that vision and that dream and all that good stuff.
It's amazing how important stories are. I don't know about you, John, but I'm looking to buy a new product and I go to their website. If they don't have a story or an about us page,
Yep,
I'm immediately not interested. I'm going to have to really, really want that item if they don't
exactly.
have those things there.
Even restaurants have, here's our story,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
started here and that's it's also a wonderful way to recruit talent. I see a lot of companies now engaging me to help them tell stories to recruit top talent, because a lot of companies are trying to recruit the top 5% producers if you're in real estate or a law firm or an architecture firm to come
Mm-hmm.
work there. And the people who are in management are probably really good at selling homes and doing law, but they don't really have any training on telling stories about what it's like to work for them as a leader, or what
Mm-hmm.
this company culture is like, or a story of another employee that came over and how happy they are. So you need different kinds of stories to recruit and keep people happy, which is a big new area that I'm entering into, as opposed to just speaking to salespeople. Now I'm speaking to management teams on how to use storytelling as a recruitment tool.
Mm. I've had the pleasure of work for companies that had a big story and it made a difference in my desire to work there. but it also made a huge difference in the consumer's perspective. We talked about Kettle One briefly. Before we even made a sale, we had to share our story with the buyer.
Nice.
And as well as if Condé Nast wanted to sell us ad space, we showed them our story. We had an 11-minute video that dated back to 1691, the founding
Wow.
of Nolet Spirits, which is the owners of Kettle One Vodka. And what was cool about that is when you were done watching the video, you felt like you were a part of the family. You felt like you were a part of that history. You felt like if you poured yourself a martini of Kettle, you were going to touch a little bit of that history and the way that it was made. And people just miss that. Why do they miss how important that is?
I think it's just a lot of people are left brain oriented and they love logic and structure. And so they think storytelling is a soft skill that doesn't really matter. When in fact, I have a theory that soft skills make you strong. I have a formula with that. It's listening plus empathy plus storytelling. When you have all three of those going on, boom, you have that magic emotional connection that makes you go to a bartender and say, I want a martini. Do you have Kettle One? As opposed to, I want a martini.
Right.
And that all vodkas are just the same. So I don't care what you make it with. So in order for someone to take that second step and request your brand requires an emotional connection for them, again, to remember it and feel like that's who they are. They're, whatever that story is, they see themselves in that story again.
Yeah. I'm reading a book written by David Green. He's the founder of Hobby Lobby, and he tells his story. And I've heard it frequently the last couple of months, maybe because it's the holiday season. But, they talk about how he started that company with $600 that he borrowed. And, they grew and then they lost and they grew, then they lost. And he started giving. But, what's interesting about, I'm not really a Hobby Lobby shopper. I know my wife is. But after reading his story and the fact that they give back 50% of all revenue, they're an $8 billion company. So they're giving away $4 billion a year, to others. He's built my loyalty. If I'm going to go shopping, I'm going to think about Hobby Lobby first.
Yep.
Right. Because that, I have a loyalty there based on the story they told. And by the way, that story took me beyond just being a customer. Somebody asked me this morning what my goals were for 2023. I said, well, my first goal is to be a more generous giver like David Green at Hobby Lobby. I want to double my giving effort. So not only did he convert me to a customer, but he also changed a habit of mine. It's amazing.
I think that's so valuable to more and more companies that are doing it. For example, Benco Dental, which sells dental supplies to dentists. Well, they created a family foundation where they donate toothbrushes to public schools and to universities. And they kind of like what Tom Shoes does with shoes, where you buy one, you get one.
Yeah.
But these are people who don't have toothbrushes. And of course, how can you keep your mouth clean if you don't have a good toothbrush? And, we just assume everyone can afford a toothbrush. That's not the case. So that kind of connection, see, they're in the dentistry business, but you don't think when they go and tell that story to other dentists that if you're buying your equipment from us, part of this money is going to help children who can't afford a toothbrush get a toothbrush? Yeah, that's making them stand out from their competitors.
I can't miss it because it's in your namesake there. It says The Pitch Whisperer.
Oh, yes, there's a story there.
And I want to hear it.
Anthem Insurance hired me to be their sales keynote speaker, and it was a lot of MBAs and nurses that were having to convince doctors to use their data versus their own data. And so after my talk, they said, we're going to have an improvisation session, and people are going to shout out objections from the audience while people on stage are playing the doctors and Anthem Insurance. And I had offered to stay past the keynote and be on stage in case somebody got stuck, because as you know, probably improvisation is all about yes and keeping things going. So when they were getting an objection and they didn't know quite how to answer it, I would whisper something from my talk in their ear so they could keep it going. And, some of the people on stage goes, oh my gosh, can you be in my ear when I'm out in the field? This was amazing. And I was being interviewed by Inc. magazine, and I shared that story, and they said, well, you're really the pitch whisperer, aren't you? And so it's stuck, and I've trademarked it, and now that's part of my brand.
Hmm. Well, I'm sure a lot of people would love to have you in their ear as they're pitching, but
Yes.
maybe they just need to read your book. The sale is in the tail, right? And by the way,
Well,
that's
that helps too.
TELE.
That's a business fable. So it's a story about storytelling set here in Austin. It's a little bit of a love letter to Austin as well. So the goal is that you see yourself in the story while you're learning how to tell better stories. And at the end are all the templates to refine your storytelling skills.
I love it. Sounds like a great tool to have. Where can people find out more about you, John? Where can we get that book and all the
Yes.
other stuff that you're doing?
Well, if you take out your phone and text the word pitch, PITCH, to 66866, I will send you the first chapter of my book for free. And my website has everything you need to know about me, johnlivesay.com. And if you can't remember the title of my book, The Sale is in the Tail, TALE, little play on words there with a fable. Just Google The Pitch Whisperer and all my content will show up.
I love it. And you've got some other books on your website there that all look to be very valuable, especially if you're in the business of selling. I think we're all in the business of selling, and we can all probably tell better stories.
That's the goal. Because you get off feeling pushy and you just become magnetic. And everyone always has time for a story. They don't always have time to hear more facts and data, especially when you're cold calling. But if they know you're going to come in with a good story, they'll probably give you 10 minutes.
Yeah. Look, John, I appreciate your time. Appreciate you being on the show and the value that you brought today. Now, remember, John gave us some great tips about putting some pre-canned stories in your bag there. You can't go wrong if you've got something to say. And like you said, if you've got a story, you might get an extra 10 minutes out of somebody. So, John, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for listening to today's show. It is my pleasure and honor to interview all of the guests that have been on the Answer is Yes podcast. If you have enjoyed the show, please go on iTunes and subscribe, give a rating, or simply tell a friend about the show. We also believe in the message of our guests and the positive influence of their stories. As my own mentor and coach, David Meltzer, has taught me, spend some time every day thinking and writing about the things in your own life that you have more than enough of. You will find out how blessed we really are. Please visit my website, livelifedriven.com, for the latest updates about me and what I'm doing. Plus, I post a monthly blog about the many topics on this show. This podcast can also be found there. As I learned early on in life, what you believe is what you will achieve. Thanks, Mark Victor Hansen, and thank you, and have a great week.